The world has been rattled by an epoch-making crisis, which has caused significant harm, shuttered businesses, put livelihoods at risk, and protectionist reactions have cast doubts about the future of globalization. As we start rebuilding, we need to seize this opportunity to build a better tomorrow, one which achieves a more balanced, fair, and ultimately a more sustainable world. Globalization has helped raise living standards around the world in recent decades, and will continue to be vital for the future. Finance will continue to play a central role in international business. Making sure capital is available when needed will be crucial in shaping the global post-COVID economic recovery. Investors will provide the funds required to help companies around the world stimulate growth and create jobs. They will also help bring about the transition of our economies to a more sustainable future. Luxembourg will play its part. Our unique expertise in international finance connects investors with projects. Our ecosystem, our toolbox of investment vehicles, and our stability offer an ideal platform for financial services to operate on a worldwide scale. Luxembourg contributes to building a better, stronger, more open, and more sustainable tomorrow.
Welcome to Focus On, bringing together financial industry experts of different horizons, sharing and discussing their insights.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for another of our Focus On events. Today's event will focus specifically on Japan. The EU and Japan together account for just around a third of the world's GDP. And Japan is obviously the EU's second biggest trading partner in Asia, and the EU is Japan's third largest trading partner worldwide. And as of February 2019, these trade links between these two areas have been further liberalised thanks to the EU and Japan Economic Partnership Agreement. So I think it's fair to say that you can see that this relationship really matters globally. Today, we're going to be focusing very specifically on financial services ties between the EU and Japan. Japanese financial services companies are well established within the EU and have been long-term investors in the bloc. And there's already a strong regulatory dialogue in place between Japan and the EU in this respect. Recent trends, however, such as Brexit, sustainable finance and digitalisation are really shifting the landscape here, with obviously COVID also serving as a catalyst for further development. Our panellists today are really experts in this respect and will guide us through how their firms are adapting and flourishing in this new environment. But before we get on to all of that, we are honoured to first have joining us today Luxembourg's Minister for Finance, His Excellency Pierre Gramegna, who will frame this event by giving us his view on how the EU will develop after the COVID crisis. So without any further ado, over to you, Your Excellency Pierre Gramegna.
Minasama, konnichiwa. It's a pleasure to be participating to this Focus on Japan issue that has been organized by Luxembourg for Finance. How much more I would have enjoyed to be physically in Japan to do so, but because of the pandemic, we can not do that yet. I hope it will be possible soon. Well, the pandemic has shown to us how important it is that we all work together all over the planet in many issues, in finance in general, and in sustainable finance in particular. I'm going to focus on that topic and see how much we can do together in that area between Luxembourg, Europe on one hand, and Japan on the other hand. Now, Japanese players in the financial services world have been present in Luxembourg for quite some time. All the major Japanese banks are present in Luxembourg, most of them with a kind of European headquarter. In the context of Brexit, we have luckily also had 3 Japanese insurance companies joining the community of players here in Luxembourg, and with all of them we can do a lot more, I think, in the field of sustainable finance. Let me maybe first focus on what is being done in Europe on this issue. I've mentioned the pandemic at the very beginning of my speech, and the pandemic has highlighted how important the issue of climate change is. In fact, we should talk about climate crisis, because the climate change has started a long time ago and we need to stop it. So the pandemic has proven climate skeptics wrong, and in fact, when we have lockdowns in the economy, we see that the planet is doing much better, so we need to accelerate. And Europe has understood this issue maybe a little bit more quickly than others, and in fact the recovery plan of Europe is focusing on 2 transitions, on the digital transition on the one hand, but more specifically and more importantly on the climate change transition. In the recovery plans, 30% of the investments are supposed to be in a mandatory way in the field of climate change. Luxembourg has done even 60% in this area, showing that how committed we are on this topic. But it's not enough to say that you are active in this area. We also need to have the right framework for that. Now, Europe has been faster than others to adopt a regulation on what is green in order to avoid greenwashing. The taxonomy of Europe is in place. We are continuing to deepen it and is considered the most advanced in the world in this area. But we need to embark all countries of the world on coherent, interoperable standards, and we hope to be able to work with Japan on this. I was recently at the ministerial meeting of the OECD, and that was one of the main concerns. That is, we need to work together so that our different systems in terms of standards become comparable. Now, in Europe, we do that top-down with regulations. In the United States, they try to do it bottom-up. I think Japan is probably somewhere in between, but I think that there's a lot of potential in Japan to do more in this area. I can assure you that you can count on Luxembourg on this issue. And in fact, in the last year, we have seen an incredible acceleration of the role of sustainable finance. Take, for example, green bonds. It took 14 years since 2007 until 2020 to reach a total issuing of green bonds of $1 trillion. As we speak, it seems that in the year 2021 alone, we're going to have 1 trillion green or sustainable bonds being listed. So it just shows the acceleration that we are all witnessing. Luxembourg is part of that phenomenon. Last September, we issued a sustainable bond of 1.5 billion euro, which was both a social bond and an environmental climate bond on the other side. The largest emitter of social or green bonds is the European Commission. Not later than last week, the European Union issued a 12 billion euro bond at the Luxembourg Green Exchange. It was the largest ever emitted green bond. So you see there's a dynamism in this area which is really extraordinary. If I look at the investment fund industry, we see a similar trend. Last year, half of the new money that came into the investment fund area in Luxembourg was all in the realm of sustainable issues. What does it mean? It seems that in Europe, also due to the pandemic, there's much more commitment to greening the portfolio of asset managers and of investors. We are totally aware that the whole issue of sustainable finance needs to take into account a triple challenge, which I call the tricky triangle. Let me explain. On the one hand, we need to make sure that we have standards that are recognized and harmonized at world level to avoid greenwashing. The second challenge is to avoid the issue of stranded assets, and that means that we make sure, or must make sure, that the investment fund industry and banks make sure that the portfolios of their investors become greener slowly but surely, so it is a transition that will take time. And the third challenge, the third part of the triangle, is to avoid social stranding. We've seen recently in Europe all the challenges and discussions around closing of some power plants because it also entails a social dimension. You cannot from one day to another give up fossil fuel. We will need time, and we are committed to the same timetable. Japan, like all of the European countries, have committed to a goal of reducing carbon emissions and getting to net zero by 2050. Japan has committed in the same way to the Paris Accord. The United States, luckily and fortunately, have joined the Paris Accord again and are committed to do the same efforts. And let's face it, even China and Saudi Arabia have announced that they will, at the latest by 2060, also reach zero carbon emissions by 2060 in their case. So we need to work together on this issue, and I hope I will soon be able to come back to Japan to work together with all of you on this issue. We must make sure that we reach this goal, not only because we want to save the planet and want to reach the goals that we have set to ourselves, because the reason why we need to do it is if we are not doing it, the climate heating, the climate crisis will become irreversible. And I can guarantee you the planet will survive it, but humankind will not. We are here in a common challenge. You can count on Luxembourg on this issue, and I look forward to working with all the actors in Japan in the near future.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Your Excellency, for those great words that I think really frame the event and the common challenges that we face. I think I completely share with you the view that, obviously COVID has really highlighted to us that we live in one shared world, and there is a need for collective action on this important topic of climate change and this tricky triangle of problems that you highlighted. And I also share with you the view that it would be nice to get back after the COVID period to physical missions and travelling again. Now with that, we'll now cross over to get the view from Japan. And so I'm delighted now to be able to introduce Keiichi Aritomo. Keiichi Aritomo is the co-founder and executive director of Fincity.Tokio, which is an organization that looks to continuously promote Tokyo as a leading global financial city. Keiichi is also a co-founder and board member of JIAM, which is the consortium for Japan International Asset Management Center. And he is also on the board of the World Alliance of International Financial Centers. Prior to his role, he was also head of Asia at Kensho Technologies, which is a leading financial AI solution provider that was eventually acquired by Standard & Poor's for around $550 million in 2018. So without any further ado, I'll now hand over to Keiichi. Keiichi, the floor is yours.
My name is Keiichi Aritomo. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Fincity.Tokio. I really appreciate giving this opportunity to present ourselves. Thank you very much, His Excellency Mr. Pierre and also Ambassador Pierre. So let me take this opportunity to introduce our organization. We are public-private organization by the name of Fincity.Tokio. We were kind of a new organization established back in 2019 based upon the Global Financial City Tokyo vision established or announced back in November 2017 based upon a year-long discussion organized by Tokyo Governor Ms. Koike. I was one of the committee members and deputy chair of this committee. So we were inspired by many other financial cities, such as Luxembourg for finance, as well as the City of London or City UK and Paris Europlus, etc., to continuously promote and improve or enhance financial center, Tokyo as a global financial center as well. So we basically do only three things. Simply, we disseminate information. Whenever we disseminate information, we strictly adhere to the fact, as opposed to any propaganda. We communicate with both domestic and international stakeholders, such as investors, financial institutions, fintech firms, government authorities, media, etc. And after communicating or sharing our information, we try to obtain candid feedback from those stakeholders as much as possible and put together or formulate policy recommendations for policymakers, central government, and local government, such as Tokyo Metropolitan Government, and industry associations. And we ensure that our recommendations are implemented, and we also communicate circle back to stakeholders about the status of our policy recommendation and implementation. In Tokyo, we are focusing on mainly asset management and fintech. It doesn't mean that other subsectors are not important. Those are most relevant to our social issues. As you know, Japan is challenged by population, aging population, and also shrinking population. But our economy has been a bit stagnant over the last few decades, and our interest rate has been very low. So we have to quickly improve our investment management or asset management capability supported by fintech firms as well. We get a lot of misunderstanding, given that we are still new in this market. So people haven't seen this kind of organization yet. So oftentimes we get misunderstood as the additional industry association, which is not true. Our ultimate beneficiaries are Japan-based residents. We also try to attract international high-skilled financial professionals and foreign financial institutions as well. But we are not necessarily promoting preferential policies for foreigners. We just want to make our market more diverse. We also promote adjustment to Japanese taxation. So oftentimes we are misunderstood to promote preferential policies for high net worth individuals. But Japan has a lot of millionaires. People don't necessarily know the fact that we have quite a few millionaires. We have about 3.8 million millionaires. So in terms of the number of millionaires in this country, we are globally number 3, following China. But as you may be aware, China has so many more total population. So we have more like a higher density of millionaire. But we should be able to utilize our wealth to drive our growth of the economy or international economies as well. And we are now also promoting urbanization of Tokyo. Financial center is considered as the heart, pumping out the blood circulation, circulate the blood through the entire body. So financial center is quite important for regional economy as well. So here's a kind of a concept as to why financial center is important. Financial centers, Fincity.Tokio has 3 main pillars of our initiative. One is to enhance investment value chain, encompassing investors, both institutional and domestic investors, and financial professionals and asset classes. So we have to make sure that investment chain is working smoothly. And sustainability is the second pillar to make sure that our effort is to make our society more sustainable. And also supply chain is quite important. We want to make sure that we provide sufficient funding for end-to-end supply chains encompassing small, medium enterprises. We have quite a few driving forces. Complexity of geopolitics is one of the driving forces. As you know, Japan has been quite stable politically, right? So stability is quite important for international finance. And pandemic is another driving force. It's a tragedy, but at the same time, it has been a driver for a lot of transformation. And carbon neutrality, and as I mentioned, we are challenged for demographically challenged. This is another driving force. And Financial Center Initiative is to achieve a number of different goals. Utilization of household wealth, and providing growth opportunity for financial professionals, and providing solid funding to achieve carbon neutrality and digital transformation, and providing solid funding for healthy and cultured lifestyle for Japan-based residents as well. Our organization has been supported by a number of different type of institutions, including, of course, Tokyo Metropolitan Government, but key major financial institutions in Japan. Also, we have academic members, such as the University of Tokyo and Tokyo Metropolitan University as well. So this is not only for public, private, but also academic. This kind of constituents, portfolio constituents is quite new in Japan. So since our inception or foundation back in 2019, we have been committed to make a promotion or communication internationally and visiting many different cities. We haven't visited Luxembourg yet, but this is on our to-do list. But we have visited quite a few financial centers. But over the last 1 year or so, we haven't been anywhere. We are kind of stuck in Japan. But fortunately, we were much more efficient to participate or organizing many online events. So we conducted about 20 online events, featuring about 50 financial experts and key government figures, etc., and reach out to more than 1 million participants. So this is something we didn't imagine before this pandemic, to be able to communicate with more than 1 million people as well. Here's some of the key achievements we have made. Because we didn't go anywhere, we were stuck in Tokyo. we spent so much time sitting down with policymakers, and they were also available. They couldn't go anywhere either. So we sat down with policymakers to, make policy recommendations, including our taxation. Our taxation is known to be very, very challenging to make any changes because Japan is a very complex country with so many different stakeholders. So making any small changes to our taxation is a huge challenge. However, we made a lot of progress over the last year. For example, one of the most unpopular Japanese taxation is performance-based compensation, which is not deductible from a corporate income tax. This is quite a unique element of Japanese taxation. By the way, I'm not proud of this, but this is something we adjusted over the last year. And also another thing is inheritance tax for overseas asset. People often joked about Japan, saying that never die in Japan because our inheritance tax is terrible. But now you are welcome to die in Japan. We are much more like a foreigner-friendly inheritance tax system right now. And credit facility for working capital, which may or may not be relevant to established organization, company, but for independent asset managers and fintech companies during the COVID-19 pandemic, working capital was quite challenging. So we convinced our government agencies and policymakers to be able to provide government subsidized credit facility for those independent small financial players as well as other industries. We also made the market entry much easier, especially for asset managers. In the past, for asset managers to get licensed, all the application has to be documented in Japanese and submitted the application face-to-face in person. But process has been digitally transformed, and English-based application is more getting acceptable by our financial agency, and that it's much more accelerated. The application process will be completed within 3 months, which used to take more than a year or so, oftentimes. So those are some of the examples of the policy changes we have made over the last year or so. So I like to switch the gear and introduce one of our new initiatives, which is named Disclosure G. G stands for Green Global Governance. What is it? This is basically to discover and polish and introduce our hidden gem. As you may or may not be aware, we have more than 3,700 listed companies in Japan. In terms of the number of listed companies, we are number 3 in the world, following India and United States. So which means that we have quite a few listed companies. However, only 12% of those listed companies are comprehensively disclosing internationally acceptable language. Only 12% of those are listed companies are, in other words, communicating with international investors, right? Which means that 88% of Japanese listed companies are not relevant to international investors. However, many of them were established to address social issues, and they get listed. But oftentimes they are not mature enough to be able to have sufficient resources to effectively communicate in English. including ESG matters. As a result, the ESG rating has been quite low. And as a result, they don't have enough traction from overseas investors. And they end up having low liquidity and low enterprise value, right? So it's a kind of vicious cycle we have been experiencing. So that's why we initiated Disclosure G initiative to help them better communicate in English, including their ESG-related effort or achievement. Right? So as a result, they should be able to get a higher ESG evaluation, and they should be able to gain more traction from foreign investors, which will lead to higher corporate value and liquidity. So that's what we are trying to achieve, right? And this is highly endorsed by Tokyo Governor Keiichi as well. So we haven't studied yet this this kind of roadshow, including we haven't done any roadshow over the last year, so because of COVID-19, but we're gonna start doing this again. And as part of the our roadshow, we like to introduce our hidden gems to international investors, right? So again, in order for us to improve our investment chain, we also have to enhance our market values as well. So this is one of the initiatives we have been taking for financial center initiatives. Here's our market entry support. You may know this is Mount Fuji, and when the weather is good, you can see Mount Fuji over Tokyo, skyscrapers, which is very beautiful. In order for any companies to tap into Japanese market or open up their presence or expanding their presence, we actually have many resources. But even myself is confused from time to time because there are so many, and it's not necessarily clear as to who can provide what kind of services to what extent, right? So that's I think this is not uncommon for any large jurisdiction. So our support resources may or may not be siloed, but one of the Fincity.Tokio's mission is to make sure we provide continuity and also like coherence, right? So those who are listening to this speech, if you get confused, please contact us so that we can help you and navigate you to right contact persons. Given the time is running out, I'd like to make a few more comments. So we are promoting financial center here in Tokyo, but we believe that this is very important to enrich our culture so that we can attract more innovative and creative talent as well, right? So in this sense, we are inspired by Luxembourg a lot. And we also want to engage broader audience, including general audience or international average people or ordinary people to understand why we are doing this. So those are the QR code for our social media, and we are looking for like a more casual and continuous dialogue with broader people, and we are looking for any recommendation, suggestion from you. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Keiichi, for that very interesting and comprehensive overview of Fincity.Tokio. It sounds like there's certainly a lot of similarities in terms of some of the issues, but also some of the sectors that you're focusing on with Luxembourg. And we strongly hope that you will be able to visit us here in Luxembourg soon. And with that, now we'll move on to the next section of our event today, which is a back-to-back panel session focusing on financial institutions, Japanese financial institutions in Europe on the first one, and then fintechs. And so without further ado, let's carry on to that. Okay, I'm now delighted to move on to our first panel of the day, which is on navigating the EU financial services landscape. And for this panel, I'm delighted to be joined by three distinguished experts in this field. Firstly, we have Christian Kanu, who is the CEO of Tokio Marine Europe SA, an insurance company set up in 2018 in Luxembourg to service Tokio Marine clients in the European Economic Area. Christian, before he moved to Luxembourg, was head of underwriting for Tokio Marines in Barcelona, overseeing continental Europe, Asia and Latin America for this international business. And then he joined Tokio Marine HCC as an underwriter in 2003, and prior to that had been a business consultant and an officer in the Italian Army for 8 years. In the studio with us today we have Katsunori Obata, who is Managing Director and CEO of Mizuho Trust and Banking in Luxembourg since July 2018. Katsunori has had a long history in Mizuho Financial Group for 30 years, more than half of which has been spent dedicated to Mizuho's business in Europe. He spent 13 years in total in London, mainly working on commercial banking business and private equity investment. And thank you for joining us today. And we also have in the studio Jean-François Fortemps, who is Managing Director of MUFG Lux Management Company since 2013, which is the UCITS and AIFMD management company of Mitsubishi UFG Financial Group in Luxembourg. Jean-François is chairman or member of the board in numerous funds, both here in Luxembourg and also in Ireland. He also set up and acted as the CEO for more than 7 years at Fortis Investments in Luxembourg, which was another UCITS management company, and has been a member of the board of directors for Fortis Investments in Oka World Lux SA. So that's my brief introduction to our panelists. Thank you all for joining us. Maybe just to kick straight off with the questions, my first sort of key topic is really around the impact of Brexit. And for this, I'd like to first hand over to Christian. Christian, obviously, Tokio Marine was a new arrival in Luxembourg as a result of Brexit, setting up your European headquarters here. Can you perhaps give us a bit of insight into your rationale behind that decision and how it's kind of been working out for you subsequently?
Indeed. Thank you, Chris. First, I would like to say that Brexit was and is a major event for the European insurance market. The reason for it is that London is the world insurance capital. Therefore, it was logical for a lot of insurers, in particular the non-European ones, to have their insurance company servicing the European Union countries domiciled in London. So with the UK leaving the European Union, all these insurers had to create a new insurance company in another EU country. So why did we choose Luxembourg for our post-Brexit European activities? Back then, after the Brexit referendum in 2016, we set up a working group to select the country where to establish our new insurance company. Like what you do in this case is you write down a long list, and then which is followed by a short list of countries. And quite logically, Luxembourg was not in the first short list that we created. And the reasons are pretty obvious, because first, we didn't have any operation in Luxembourg. And also Luxembourg at the time was famous for hosting life insurers and asset managers. but not non-life insurance like us. Consequently, we focused more on the countries where we already had a local presence. And I mean, as you know, setting up an insurance company implies that you have to engage with the local regulator to get a license, and that's what we did. In 2017, we approached 2 regulators in two different countries. And with the first one, we didn't go that far away because we quickly realized that they were not willing to engage with us in English, but they wanted to use the local language. And for an international group like us, was not a practical option. While with the second regulator, we quickly also realized that they wanted to have a lot of substance by day 0 locally. So it is also important to remember that at the time, Brexit was not something very clear. There was a lot of uncertainty around Brexit. And people at the time were also talking about a second referendum. So we were not really in a rush to set up, to put a lot of substance in the locally. So at this point, what we noticed that other insurance companies with a similar profiles were announcing that they had chosen Luxembourg as the location for their European insurance company. So we decided to reconsider Luxembourg. We then approached the Luxembourg regulator, the CEA, and asked for a meeting. During the meeting, we saw a regulator that was demanding, but also very pragmatic. After the first meeting with them, we immediately felt that Luxembourg was the right place, and what came later was basically its history. So now, after more than 3 years after we settled, we got a license in Luxembourg. So how do we value our experience? Clearly, we have no regrets about choosing Luxembourg, and apparently we are not the only one thinking the same, because in the last 3 years, Luxembourg has become the jurisdiction of choice for non-life insurers within the European Union. This is not without a reason. If I have to say 3 things that we really came to appreciate in Luxembourg, they are: first is the financial and legislative stability. Second is the quality, availability, and pragmatism of the regulator. Third is the government. I mean, the Luxembourg government is open for business. They like to engage with companies. They ask for their feedback. They listen. And then eventually they try to find a win-win situation. And last but not least, we felt very welcome by day 1 when we arrived. And now, just after 3 years, we feel very well integrated in the business community.
Great. Well, thank you for that, and very interesting to hear about about your kind of pragmatism with dealing with quite a complex and, as you say, quite a dynamic situation in the past. Maybe just to hand over to Katsunori here as well. I mean, Mizuho has been in Luxembourg obviously for a relatively longer period of time, but you've also got substantial presence in London and elsewhere in Europe. And how did Brexit affect your business? I mean, obviously there was a big impact for Tokio Marine. Was it the same for you, or not so much?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Actually, in terms of Mizuho Financial Group, for the last 30 years, over 30 years, Mizuho Financial Group's European operation has been set on 3 pillars: 1, commercial banking; 2, security houses; and 3, custody and fund management. Okay, and those 3 businesses are basically based in London, and in Luxembourg. Mm-hmm. That structure has not really substantially changed after the Brexit. Commercial banking status in London is bank status, not subsidiary. So we can continue to operate. And the operation is compensated in the subsidiary in Amsterdam. Security house, they're located in London. They have established a subsidiary in Frankfurt so that they can continue their operation in the continent. And needless to say, Luxembourg operation hasn't really changed. So in terms of Brexit's impact, there haven't been a dramatic change in the way we operate, although compensated by some subsidiaries set up in the continent. If you assume that financial centers are not solely regulated by the regulation change of Brexit, but by the accumulation of knowledge, expertise, and experiences, etc., then probably the way Mizuho will operate in Europe will not be significantly impacted by the Brexit. That's my personal experience and Mizuho's experience in Europe.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting, I think, to see the multi-polarization of your strategy there in Europe. You know, not necessarily having all your eggs in one basket, but actually having quite a spread presence across the EU and also in the UK. Chrissy, I'll just come back to you maybe and looking forwards, projecting forwards slightly. One of the topics that we obviously see on the horizon as a net consequence of Brexit is that there's a strong likelihood of some form of regulatory divergence between the UK and the EU. Whereas before, obviously, they operated under the same framework. So how does this kind of operate your business going forward, considering that you will almost certainly have a presence in both the UK and the EU in the future?
So far, we have almost no impact, but I have to admit that the situation is pretty uncertain. I would like to give some background for the members of the audience who are not familiar with the European insurance regulatory framework. For an insurer operating in the European Union, there are a lot of regulations, such as GDPR, IDD, sanction regime, and you name them. However, what I would consider to be the main regulatory framework is Solvency II Directive. Until 31st of January 2020, the UK was Solvency II compliant because it was part of the EU. Then the Brexit happened, and in November 2020, during the transition period, the British government declared that the EU was equivalent for Solvency II purposes. However, so far, the EU has not granted the Solvency II equivalence to the UK. And as I speak, there is no timeline for it. Therefore, when it comes to regulatory framework, now we are in a sort of a limbo, because the UK is still applying the same Solvency II regulation as all the EU countries, but there is no mutual recognition of it. And in this limbo, at Tokio Marine Europe, we are still operating as the UK had an equivalent status. Now, if you look at the future, what I think is going to happen over the next few years is that the UK and the EU are going to diverge. This is normal. The terms of Solvency II were built as a compromise between many states with very different markets and needs. As a result, it will be natural that over time the UK and the EU will diverge. So for me, the key point is how much the UK and the EU are going to be allowed to diverge in order to maintain a mutual equivalence. This seems to be a technical question, but in reality it is not. The reality is that granting or not equivalence is a political decision. To stress this point, I would like to quote what a senior EU official recently said. We use equivalence to manage interaction with third countries, including the UK. When it comes to the UK, as with all third countries, we must consider our own interest. This is clearly not a political statement. In addition, a decision on insurance equivalence won't be taken in isolation, but as part of a broader EU-UK future relationship. So this is the context. And if now we go back to the specific case of Tokio Marine Europe, Tokio Marine is a subsidiary of a UK-based insurance company, which means we have very strong ties with our mother company. So if one day it will be confirmed that the UK will not have equivalence, this event will have a considerable impact on our operation in Europe. Now, I mean, it's difficult to measure the impact, the exact impact, but I can anticipate that there will be more expensive for us to operate because of increased regulatory requirements for many EU-UK transactions.
Yeah.
Back to you. Chris.
Thank you. I think that's very interesting, and it just goes. I mean, one of the things that I think has really characterised the Brexit period is exactly that uncertainty. So it's quite interesting to see also that extending forwards in time as well as now that Brexit is technically done. To move on to a topic that is perhaps slightly less uncertain, but is more of an important general trend. I'd now like to talk to Jean-François perhaps to kick off with. Since the financial crisis in 2008, we've seen negative interest rates in Europe, and the situation for over 10 years. And this is in some ways kind of similar to a situation that Japan's found itself in since the early 2000s. As a management company that manages funds that are ultimately looking for a return, how do you think that has changed your investment focuses for the funds that you have domiciled here in Europe?
Yes, you are right. The situation of low interest rate is well known in Japan. It's not a new situation, it's 20 years old. And the Japanese institutional investors are used to cope with this. And the first reaction when they witness on the Japanese market that interest rate was so low, they went for international diversification. So, and that's maybe the roots of MUFG Lux Management Company here in Luxembourg, because then there was a question how to go outside of Japan, how to invest in Europe and in the US. And like most other competitor, we had a global custodian in Luxembourg established. We had a management company, and we were able to establish their funds for, at the beginning, government bonds exposure. But then US government bonds, the yield went negative, and our client moved to corporate bonds and to high yield bonds. But now, those days, the yield are not there. So our clients are moving to real assets. And that's what we have established now, a global platform. We call it follow the sun model. Japan is where the sun is rising every day. The start of the day is there. And we have our Japanese colleague taking care of our clients. And we are setting up here the private equity or the real estate funds for their needs. Getting to the US if need be, and getting back at the beginning of the day with the conclusion for our clients. So real assets are really developing fast, and it's an opportunity for Luxembourg, of course, because in terms of private equity and real assets, our structure, I think, are worldwide well known, and this is a brand, I would say, which Japanese pension funds or Japanese insurance company recognize, and they are using them quite intensively those days. The expertise is in Luxembourg for that, for structuring, for tax purposes, for custody, for all the usual aspects. And our flexible model, based on UCITS or SIF or RAFE structure, is there. We can outsource portfolio management wherever it makes sense. And this is really appreciated by our clients, I must say. So, yeah, it's a nice opportunity for us.
Yeah, it's certainly a sector that I think generally one can see as having a major growth trajectory here in Luxembourg. And one of the other things which I think our finance minister highlighted earlier on in his address today is really the development of green finance. So perhaps moving back to Katsunori now, as we hopefully are emerging from the COVID pandemic, one of the clear goals of the EU recovery programme is to focus on sustainability. How do you see that kind of topic being instituted in your own organisation, perhaps generally?
Yeah, right. I thought we got used to the low interest environment for the last 20 years. However, it's really surprising the green thing, ESG, has entered into everyday life of financial institutions like Mizuho Financial Group. I'm now in the custody fund management side, and Jean-François probably is the expert in SFDR thing, but it's not limited to SFDR. It's about everyday life of financial institutions, strategy, tactic, targeting the client, how we coordinate with the client, the financing, it's not only about commercial lending. Of course, it's about commercial lending. It's a big issue. And then ECM, DCM, and fund structure. So it's really surprising the institution, as Mizuho, is trying to implement it on every single level, from the strategy to the everyday life of every single, probably RM officer, retail, and corporate. So it's a big change. And, okay, is it going for clear direction? Probably everybody knows we don't have the 100% answer on this ESG thing. But, although we are not clear about in which direction we're going, there will be hiccups and tweaks in the directions. But one thing is sure, that every single person involved in financing should be aware of ESG every day, at every moment. That's what I feel in Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. And maybe actually we'll come directly on to Jean-François here, since Katsunori set him up so nicely to talk about SFDR. That's obviously an important EU regulation that came into effect in March 2021 this year in Europe. And how are you coping with this? Is it business as usual again? Or is it a bit more complicated than that? How do you see it?
It's not business as usual. When we started with the ESG program, and I fully concur with Katsunori, it's a fantastic opportunity, and there are no choice. We need to be successful in this. We need to move and do something. Still, when I saw this legislation and the new burden for our client, I said, my God, another one. There are so many legislation. We are a heavily regulated industry. So I tried to establish a plan that I presented to our MUFG client in Japan, which would say, let's be humble at start. There are so many uncertainties around this new legislation. Let's maybe wait and propose to our client to start with Article 6 funds. The Article 6 funds are the least involved in sustainable finance. And let's wait that the dust settled, that all the legislation is well known. And we went to with this message to our clients, and there I was surprised. Because usually when there is a new legislation, it's a new burden. That's not really necessarily pleasant. It's a lot of work, some costs associated with this. And there, the answer from our client was, no. We are interested in ESG. And that was really a surprise. And we want to go to Article 8, the more involved ESG, or Article 9, the one which impacts on our society and in a good way. And therefore, now at this stage, we are working with our client to move them to this new, more ambitious fund. And actually, with insight and looking into what is happening in Japan, when you see the financial industry, starting with the regulator, the FSA, they published, I think it was in September, the 2021-2022 outlook. And one of the important point was sustainability risk management. And I am very proud that Luxembourg is embracing ESG together with Europe and trying to lead the way on those aspects. So this is really, for once, a very good change in legislation where our clients are very pleased to move into this direction, even if there are costs, even if there are a lot of uncertainties. That's to be known and accepted. But for the time being, it's nice opportunity.
It's quite interesting to see it as a positive for a change. So, Christian, just to round out the green finance topic with you, I mean, how are climate change considerations becoming part of your underwriting principles at Tokio Marine, and what does it mean for your business there?
Chris, the timing of your question is very good because at Tokio Marine, we recently revised our climate strategy, which was first disclosed in 2020. And I'd like to read a sentence of the climate strategy that I think resume our position. And the Tokio Marine Group will not provide new insurance underwriting capacities and new financing to coal-fired power generation projects or thermal coal mining projects, aiming to achieve the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement. And I would like to make a few considerations on what I've just read. First, Tokio Marine Group is not only a provider of insurance protection, but also Tokio Marine is also an important investor. So our position is that we are going to stop. We have decided to stop not only to provide insurance protection, but also financing to coal-related projects. Second, I would like to share how we are putting our mouth where our words are by setting some concrete internal targets. Our group has set a target of 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared with the 2015 baseline. We have also set a target to use 100% renewable energy in our power consumption at our key business facilities by the same 2030. And last but not least, we are also active on the renewable energy space on the business side. Two examples. We are trying to provide more and more insurance underwriting capacities for renewable energy business, such as solar and wind power companies, through specialized products. And we are also making strategic acquisition of companies with expertise in the renewable energy space, as we did by acquiring G-Cube, a renewable energy specialist, in 2020. I would like to conclude by saying that at Tokio Marine Group, we are ready to do our part in the fight against climate change, as we have done in front of any major challenge the world to face since our foundation in 1879.
Well, thank you very much. I think it's, again, interesting to see the sort of, the broad base of activity that's going on in this field. And, for any of listeners at home, if you want to find out more about this topic, we actually recorded a Sustainable Finance Forum quite recently. So if you check our website, there's a lot more content on this field where we could spend entire days talking about it. Unfortunately, we don't have entire days to talk about any topic at the moment. So I'm aware we're reaching the end of our panel here. So just as a quick general quick-fire wrap-up. I'd like to ask each of you in turn, what do you see as the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity for your business here in Europe in the coming years? So maybe if we start with Christian remotely and then we come back round into the studio. Christian.
Okay, I'm talking again about Brexit, and I don't want to seem obsessed, but it's a reality. Brexit represents really a major event for the European insurance industry. So I see that Brexit both represent our biggest opportunity and biggest challenge. So Brexit represents our biggest opportunity because following the Brexit, we decided to double down on Europe. And with Tokio Marine Europe, we created a strong insurance platform that should enable us to substantially grow our European business over the next few years. However, Brexit also represents our biggest challenge because Brexit is still an open process, as I mentioned before, when it comes, for example, to the regulatory environment, with a lot of important items still to be discussed and agreed between the EU and the UK. Unfortunately, as a business, this is a process that we cannot control. And if the relationship between the EU and the UK will turn sour in the future, our European operations will suffer.
Great, thank you. So Brexit, again, still dominates the agenda for some time to come, unfortunately. Katsunori.
Okay. Brexit, regulatory change, ESG, those changes will certainly bring opportunities to Luxembourg and Mizuho Luxembourg. Okay, I think, as I said, if financial centers are based on the accumulation of knowledge, expertise, and these are accumulated upon the actions of each institution and regulator. That means if we take a quick action against any changes, that will bring us opportunities and benefits. On the other hand, if we fail into complacency, including Luxembourg's government and Mizuho Luxembourg, then that would be the risk we will fail into. Changes are opportunities, and at the same time, we keep the we fell into complacency, that would be the risk for us, all of us, I think.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, that focus on agility and moving rapidly. Yeah. And Jean-François, I leave you the final words then in that case.
Thank you. I will take it like Katsunori-san from a Luxembourg perspective, and I think the opportunity for MUFG Lux Management Company and our sister company MIBL in Luxembourg, it's really real assets. I think this is a sector where we have all the expertise here in Luxembourg. We are recognized by this. It answers a need from our clients, yield. So I really think this is a nice opportunity for us. And in terms of challenge, I will again mention ESG. That's a worldwide challenge. COP26 reminded us about that. That's really, really something which is high on the agenda, simply of citizens. And that's our duty as a financial company to promote and find solution for that. And this, I think, will be my challenge till I retire, maybe, which is some years down the road, still.
Great, fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm aware that we're rapidly running out of time here, so all that remains for me to do is to thank our three panelists, Christian, Katsunori and Jean-François. And now I'd like to hand over to Nasir Zubairi, who will be leading a panel on riding the fintech wave. Thank you very much.
Konnichiwa. Welcome. Thank you all for being here. We have a fantastic panel today looking at fintech in Luxembourg and its relationship with Japan. I have a wonderful panel with me today of great speakers. We have Takeshi Kito, Vice Chair of the Fintech Association in Japan, joining us remotely. We have Rikiya Masuda, Co-Head and CFO of bitFlyer Europe, and Toby Otsuka, CEO of Rakuten Europe Bank. Welcome to you all. I think best is if we can maybe spend 30 seconds, if you could just introduce yourself to the audience, maybe starting with you, Toby.
All right, thank you, Nasir, and hello, everyone. I'm Toby Otsuka. Well, actually, my correct name is Toshihiko Otsuka, but just call me Toby. I'm heading up Rakuten Europe and also Rakuten Europe Bank. I've been in Luxembourg for 7 years. I've been in the banking industry for almost nearly, I think, 30 years. Starting off from Japanese big banks to fintech startups and online banks. And now I'm here. So very good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. And Rikiya?
Hi, nice to meet you. This is Rikiya Masuda from bitFlyer Europe. And I've been working for bitFlyer since 2015. And bitFlyer is the biggest Japanese cryptocurrency exchange. And I came here in Luxembourg in 2017 to start up the European operation for the group, and now I'm here.
Thank you very much. And Takeshi, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Takeshi Kito, Vice Chairman of Fintech Association Japan. And I am in charge of international partnership, and we have been collaborating with LHoFT for more than 4 years. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here. So let's kick off with some questions. And I think the most obvious question is that, and maybe to you, Toby and Rikiya, you've both been operating in Luxembourg for quite some time. How have you seen it develop? What brought you here in the first place? What are the big things?
Right. For the first place, we decided to create a regional head office of Rakuten in Luxembourg. So it has almost nothing to do with fintech. So we created a small office here more than 10 years ago. And then it started to evolve. And then we acquired several companies in the region. And then, at some point in time, we thought it's going to be a good destination for our fintech business because in Japan, Rakuten is a combination of e-commerce and fintechs and everything. And we would like to replicate the same way in Europe. So that's when we started to look at Luxembourg from the fintech point of view. And then we acquired a PI license, and then we developed a banking license. Yeah, so that's the trajectory we followed. Yeah.
And Rikiya, you were one of the first firms in Europe to actually acquire a license as bitFlyer Europe. Why did you choose Luxembourg?
The reason why the company chose Luxembourg to get a license is because of the the approach of the regulator, so approachable regulator, I would say. So back in 2017, when I started to work to get to obtain a payment institution license to start operations, there were not so many people or not so many regulators who understand and can discuss how to properly set up the regulated entity here. But Luxembourg was one of the very few countries that tried to accommodate the new technology or new industry, which is crypto, and try to come up with how to properly regulate and set up the entity to run this business. So that was the main reason for us to come here.
And Rikiya, if I may say, you were one of the first occupants of the LHoFT 4 years ago, but very quickly moved out due to massively growing scale. I mean, I can comment on this myself, but I mean, how have you seen the fintech sector here develop over the? You've been here since almost I've been here, I think. Yes.
The one very interesting thing to mention is the fintech company doesn't necessarily mean only the financial institution as such that needs to be regulated, but also there are many the service company that provide their service to finance institutions. For example, the anti-money laundering monitoring service providers, or especially for crypto, since the blockchain transaction is something new, there are a kind of new wave of the startups coming into this like a market to support, to provide the financial related services to those companies, or for example to provide a better the user experience for the customer onboarding or the banks or new banks, like i.e. eKYC, know your customer solution, etc., etc. So the evolvement I see in this market is not necessarily only finance, but including all these surrounding industries. That's the very interesting point to mention.
Yeah, thank you, Toby. And Takeshi, as you say, and thank you very much, we've been working together for quite a number of years. What do you see as the opportunities generally for Japanese fintech firms in Europe, and specifically maybe how do you see that collaboration working and enabling via Luxembourg?
Firstly, Europe is one of the biggest financial markets and that has more than 400 million population, and many countries are connected by passporting framework. And obviously, Luxembourg is the biggest international fintech center in the region. And I think it's natural for fintech companies that want to go international to choose Luxembourg as an entry point. And particularly for wealth tech companies, Luxembourg has a huge cluster of investment funds or asset management. And meanwhile, Tokyo Metropolitan Government is recently focusing on this space and trying to be a hub in the APAC region. So I believe there is a big opportunity in collaborating between Luxembourg and Japan for ecosystem perspective.
Yes, if I can add, I mean, I think what I found amazing since being here for 5 years is just how easy it is to meet people, right? It's a small financial center, and the access to very senior decision makers I've never seen anywhere else. I've worked in Japan and a few other centers. I find it quite startling. Thank you, Takeshi. Again, back to you, Rikiya, maybe. As you say, you mentioned a few things, but what more can you tell us about the attractiveness of Luxembourg as a financial center, or as a fintech center for you?
There are a couple of points to mention, but one of them would be the language capability of the people, because the Luxembourg, although there is the local language, Luxembourgish, but basically most of the people speak more than 2 languages. And I myself actually speak 3 languages, but it doesn't really, you know, it's nothing in Luxembourg because people speak like 4 or 5 languages by default. And the English as a business language is not a problem at all. So unfortunately, I can't speak French, which is the most commonly used language in Luxembourg. But however, I didn't have any problem in running my business in Luxembourg. That's a very advantage in the European market because where the tens of languages are spoken. But if you come here in Luxembourg, then you will be able to find someone who speaks any languages. Yeah. So that's one of the strengths for this market, I would say. Besides that, since Luxembourg has been operating the country that supports financial industry since long, so all the kind of financial services or the firms that support the finance-related companies, that ecosystem is quite robust and strong. And for example, the audit firms or consulting firms, etc., there is an ecosystem that can support any kind of needs that fintech firms may have. So that is quite useful for the new firms to get into the market, I would say.
Okay, I love the way you grew from 2 languages to 4 languages to 10 languages there. I mean, the capabilities here for myself, likewise, astounding. I'm a complete Philistine. I speak 1 language, English. I did try and attempt French, but because everyone switches so easily to English here, I find it amazing that I live in the heart of Europe and that it's not a problem. Toby, you talked a little bit about your journey of how Rakuten sort of went from just having an office into building out the bank, etc. What is it that made it attractive to continue that journey and build out the financial capability here?
Yeah, so all the good things Rikiya has already covered, but I also would like to add one dimension, which is a very well-thought balance between open fintech community versus healthy regulations in place. So I think of course we have much bigger fintech hub or financial centers like London or whatever, but here I can see the access to the regulators and also senior officials in the government, and also I have access to private sector guys, and I think I can enjoy a broad range of expert services like lawyers, accountants, and everything here. So it's very handy and it's very manageable, and I think in order to run a healthy, sound banking business, I think this place is one of the best. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Takeshi, I know that you keep tabs, not just on Europe, obviously, but around the world for opportunities in fintech for your firms, as well as generally the trends in fintech. If I could ask, how have you seen the EU move forward? What are sort of some of the key differences maybe between fintech Japan and fintech in Europe that you've been seeing over the past 4 or 5 years?
I think fintech in Europe is having more ecosystem approach because there are so many countries that have different ecosystems and different kind of financial businesses. And on the other hand, Japan is it's kind of one ecosystem with one language, and so I think we can learn from a lot from European Union approach, and also we can use that kind of approach for collaborating with other countries in the region, in the APAC region. So yeah, so this is what we have seen, and that's my opinion for the difference and what can we do together.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Takeshi. And Toby, what are sort of some of the things you've witnessed? I mean, obviously you're here to service Europe and the EU broadly. What are kind of some of the advances you've seen over the past 4 or 5 years?
Well, I see a very sort of a advanced regulatory environment, in Europe as opposed to the other part of the world. For example, PSD2. This is a very, I would say, innovative idea to extend to the payment service to the to the level of next generation, where open banking prevails. And European Commission put in place the set of regulation first, and then we decided to, we started to implement it since 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Now we see a real product, up and running in our industry, which is amazing. And in this area, I see, of course, fintech startups started to take the initiatives, but then traditional players like banks and other financial institutions started to follow. And then, there is a sort of a chemistry to work together or acquire or whatever. So, I think it's a very dynamic, environment we are in. And I really would like to take advantage of that by being here. Yeah.
And Rikiya, I mean, obviously you work in one of the cutting-edge sectors of crypto, which has seen tremendous focus over the past 4 or 5 years. How have you seen EU change in terms of its perception to that area and more broadly to fintech?
Especially from regulatory point of view, there is no active regulation as of now that specifically regulate the crypto. However, there is the ongoing initiative called MiCA. So that's meant to be regulating the crypto specifically and in order to provide the level playing field for the industry. So starting new regulation in Europe, EU, is extremely challenging, I would say, because as Kito-san mentioned, it's not one country. There is 30 countries, and it needs to go through every single stakeholders. However, now we are already seeing something big is coming as a regulations. And especially for the company like us that operate the financial services on the regulated environment, the level playing field is really important. So that I see as a very big move coming from the EU as a nation.
Okay, thank you. Takeshi, you understand your sector and your members in Japan very well, obviously, and you work very closely with them. What do you see as being some of the main opportunities and challenges for the Japanese fintech firms coming into the EU in terms of being able to then maybe build their business out?
I believe the opportunity is expanding business in the markets outside of Japan, because Japanese ecosystem is unfortunately shrinking. So we need to go international if we want to expand our businesses. That's the opportunities. And the challenges, as other panelists mentioned, I think we have 2 common challenges for going international. First one is the regulation, and the other is data sharing, because European Union has GDPR regulation. So we need to tackle these 2 obstacles for having more international transactions and collaboration.
Okay. Rikiya, what sort of big differences do you see between operating out of Luxembourg and in the EU relative to your operations in Japan? Where do you see some of the things that are enabling opportunity for you in Europe relative to Japan, and maybe where are things a little bit trickier?
I see this as how do I say, front and back of the one coin. So the Europe, as a market, is quite big, and as Kito-san mentions, like 400 million populations, and more than 30 different countries. especially for the country like Japan, where it's kind of closed and doesn't necessarily have a reach to the outside market, the market outside of Japan. But here, Luxembourg is it's a very small country, but however, the access to other countries neighboring or EU in general, it allows you to, have a footprint in multiple different countries. So that's one of the opportunity and advantage by having establishment here in Luxembourg. But it is also a challenge because, as I also mentioned, the language spoken are completely different in those countries, and then also cultures are different. So I would say it's not really a European market as such. There's no European market, but there is the 30 different the market. So you have to understand some of the important market in the European region by actually approaching those people, by understanding every single market, and then also modify your services tailored for each market. That is extremely challenging. So it's really a backside and front side of the same coin, as say.
But I could imagine personally also quite a bit of fun because you might get to travel to all these countries and experience all these cultures, right?
Yeah. Oh, that is one of the best parts for my life in Luxembourg, I would say.
Excellent. And Toby, yourself, I mean, what do you see as being some of the biggest opportunities and challenges for your business operating here relative to, say, in Japan?
Well, yeah, same here. So, Rakuten Group as a whole, is, having multiple different verticals, be it e-commerce or video streaming and messaging apps and digital marketing and so forth. And our bank is a little bit unique in the way that, we are mission to provide financial services to the audience of those services, right? So we would like to create an ecosystem or synergies with the group companies as opposed to an isolated financial institution. So in our case, it applies even more that Luxembourg is the best destination to reach out to other European countries. Of course, we need to deal with each country's sort of uniqueness, peculiarities, and so forth. But at the end of the day, passporting a banking license out to other European countries is a fantastic way to support those services rather than having an individual banking license in each country, which is almost impossible.
Yep. Yeah. Takeshi, if I may sort of talk a little bit about Japan now, it has obviously for me been quite a while since I lived there. I think I lived there, 2003. I'm sure a lot has changed. But I remember critically when I lived there, let's say the complexities of dealing with the traditional finance institutions and their budgeting processes, which were very, very rigid and didn't allow much room for firms or new technologies to be sold within, say, the scope of a year or 2 years, because everything was ready. Has that changed much? Is it easier in Japan now for fintech firms to work with traditional financial institutions?
Actually, there is no drastic change, to be honest. But due to this COVID-19 pandemic, many financial institutions trying to digitalize. So I think this is this brings us to, let's say, more opportunities to collaborate with international institutional financial institutions for fintech solutions and fintech collaboration.
Yeah. And with COVID-19, did you see a massive step change as well from consumers adopting fintech solutions?
Yeah, I think so. Many consumers are using cashless solutions, and also they are being more familiar with using fintech applications and solutions.
Okay, I think we've seen similar in Europe, but maybe if we ask you, Toby, how open do you find Europe? I mean, it's maybe a little silly to put it all together because I think there are differences between countries, but maybe generally and with some specific examples, how open do you find Europe, both from the B2C perspective, the consumer side, and the financial institution side, to collaborate with fintech, with your business?
Yes, and that's really a good point. I think European people tend to try new things. That's not a big hurdle, but also they are very good at assessing it. So when the internet arose, they checked it and then discussed whether it makes sense for them to use it or not, right? I think this applies to all the new things. For example, QR code. QR code was not popular at all in Europe before the pandemic. After the pandemic, restaurants, bars, and all the stuff, they started to use QR code. And in Europe, NFT is prevailed. Everybody, every merchant has has a terminal for NFT. However, this QR code might pave a way to be applied to some other financial fintech products, right? And they are keen to understand what's new, but a little bit maybe cautious in terms of putting a lot of resource to that, and then start to actively using it as a part of their lives. And then if they think it makes sense, they're gonna go for it. So I think it's a bit different dynamics than Japan, to be honest. But yeah, it's a very interesting market and open to any new innovation, which is great. Yeah. And when it comes to the fintech community, I think it's very open. But I saw some resistance from the traditional players 5 years ago, maybe. For example, PSD2 and all of those new things. They are a bit, watching what's going on. But in the recent couple of years, I think they started to again, internalize those by acquiring fintech companies or collaborating with fintech companies, whatever it is. So I think they are getting more and more open. Again, well thought approach is one of the features I see in Europe. Yeah.
And Rikiya, the adoption of crypto, how's it been going for you?
Well, it was extremely difficult to explain this topic in front of traditional players in the finance market back in 2017-18. But now people realize that crypto is something that they cannot ignore. So although the readiness to accommodate the new technology like crypto, it really depends on the companies. But at the same time, it is inevitable anyway. The inclusion of the new technology is inevitable for anyone. And then people started to realize those things. So having said that, now it's becoming more and more, approachable. And it is becoming easier for us to speak to those traditional players in Europe. And other things to mention is, especially in the context of fintech, there are already, let's say, relatively longer running and gigantic fintech firms that was born in Europe, like Revolut and TransferWise. Those players played a significant role to, put certain, to make the fintech in general more approachable also for the consumers. So what I can see is the European people are more used to use those relatively new apps compared to other countries, especially Japan, I would say. And then also, one thing I was surprised when I came here in Luxembourg is the application used by the banks are quite well designed.
Yes, they are, aren't they? I find it pleasantly surprising, actually. I had bank accounts in multiple countries across Europe, and I mean, there's one or two that are particularly good, right? I think, yeah.
So I used to work for a Japanese bank, and especially 3-5 years ago, I didn't really like the whole design or how it is designed from the user experience point of view. But it was not the case for Luxembourg banks and some other European banks, even from 3-4 years ago. So that also made me understand that the European people want that.
I think there's an inevitability around all of this. If I may just say, I just yesterday received the initial results of a payment survey that I conducted in Luxembourg. Now, Luxembourg's not a huge market for any of you guys, but it was still interesting to see some of the data for a country that some people see as a little bit maybe traditional. The data showed that 10% of the population have bank accounts with the new banks, the new like the Revoluts, etc., and that 12% use applications for crypto, which is very interesting in Luxembourg. So, you know, if that's representative here, I can only hope that we see better data and a growth in these markets generally across Europe. And I think, as you say, I think some of these like Revolut and others have really led the way to help people see what the experiences they can have. We're almost out of time. I wanted to ask both of you, Toby and Rikiya, one last question. What do you like about living here in Luxembourg?
All right. Should I start first?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I love meeting various kind of people, you know, from different background.
Yeah.
Because this place is a mixture of, you know, very different, well, you know, mixture of people, right? So a lot of expats and, you know, people from other countries come to work here. So I really, for example, in my company, we have around 65 employees, and out of that, we have 22, 23 nationalities.
Wow.
So it's really diversified.
Yeah.
And we try to accommodate all of those and then try to include them. And then we would like to take advantage of the diversification, right? So it's really a sort of a practical example of diversity and inclusion, you know. So I really like this dynamism here. Yeah, so that's the best part of this country.
And Rikiya?
Well, in addition to what Toby just said, as a father of 2 little kids, the Luxembourg environment for the family to raise kids is awesome. It's really great. It's very peaceful, and there are lots of parks that the kids can play. And then also there are many good schools, international schools, local schools. So especially for the family with little kids, this is a really good place to live. And besides that,
travel?
Yeah, travel is one thing. And then also the, you know, small community here, just by just calling a friend, hey, out for a beer tonight, and then the 50 minutes later, they can all come. So that's the size of this community, the convenience to hang out with the friends here. That's also the part I like.
Good. Takeshi, maybe we could get you to move here at some point. I hope you heard what these guys said, and I hope to see you here soon, actually. It'd be great. What's travel like from Japan at the moment?
Yes, actually, in Japan, the state of emergency was lifted already. And yeah, I hope I can visit Luxembourg again. Actually, I've been there.
Yes.
Once, it was 15 years ago.
Wow.
But yeah, hopefully I can visit again soon. And
I hope so too. You're always welcome here. Listen, we've run out of time, so Toby, Rikiya, Takeshi, thank you so much for your insights and words today. And thank you all for listening, and I will now hand back to Chris Hollifield.
Well, thank you very much, Nasir, Toshihiko, Rikiya, and Takeshi for that really interesting panel on the sort of complexities of the interplay in the European market for Japanese fintechs. Now, obviously, today's event has been primarily focused on financial services relationships between Luxembourg or Europe and Japan. But it goes without saying that the kind of range of topics in which there is cooperation between those two areas is much broader than just financial services. And so to finish off our event today and provide us with a wider and broader overview of the relationships between Luxembourg and Japan, I am now delighted to welcome His Excellency Ambassador Pierre Ferring, who is Luxembourg's ambassador in Japan, to give us an overview of Luxembourg and Japan relations beyond financial services. Thank you very much.
Distinguished Mr. Minister, dear speakers, dear audience, dear friends, I have the honor to be the final speaker in today's setting and to some extent to conclude our debate. A big thank you, arigato gozaimasu, to the organizer as well as to the panelists for all the information provided about financial services and fintech. Luxembourg and Japan have been for decades strong partners in the world of financial services. When listening to today's debate, and when taking into account the positive, current, in Japan, European Union relationship, I have no doubt that our cooperation will even grow stronger in the years to come. The multilinguistic nature of the Luxembourg labor market, as there is French, English, German, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, obviously Luxembourgish too, etc., puts my country into a pole position in Europe when it comes to recruit qualified staff able to serve customers in their mother tongue. In my time as a diplomat, I have been moving around a lot in the world over the last 25 years. And in my honest opinion, the foreign language education system of Luxembourg is among the very best in the world. The open immigration policies of the Luxembourg government are adding to this rich linguistic and cultural diversity of Luxembourg, which is essential when you want to serve your customers in your customer's language. For that reason, I believe that Luxembourg is, apart from many other factors, as discussed before, an excellent place for the Japanese financial services industry in order to overcome the linguistic hurdles which are characteristic of the European Union single market. However, as important as financial services are, I think that we would all agree that there is a world beyond, which we all cherish and which fell partially victim of the pandemic, namely the human interaction in everything we are doing. Meeting customers from all over the world is more than just trying to conclude business deals. It is a kind of social interaction, which is at the core of what human beings are since ancient times. The worldwide struggle against the pandemic has been long. Even today, as today's online setting shows, our fight against COVID-19 is not yet fully over. However, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel of social isolation. All over the last months during the pandemic, I have been touched in particular by the many gestures of friendship going far beyond mere business interests. Despite all sanitary control measures and social isolation, I feel that paradoxically, the pandemic has made us move closer together, has made us realize to what extent we cherish doing what we do, may it be sometimes by simply being together at a networking reception, when business is a pleasant excuse to enjoy each other's company. This social feature is an indispensable element of our profession, because honoring friendship is at the basis of trust, and trust is again at the very foundation of our profession. Friendship, trust, reliability, and respect are the guiding values for the Luxembourg-Japan relationship. With these values in mind, the Luxembourg government has decided to participate at the World Expo in Osaka in 2025. The Luxembourg pavilion at the Expo in Osaka shall be the meeting place for Japanese, Luxembourg, European people, a place combining the best features and characteristics of our cultures. Even if that Osaka Expo is still some time down the river, I am pleased to convey you already today an invitation to the Luxembourg Pavilion and to have there again a good time together. Thank you for today. To all of you who have been joining us, you're all friends of Luxembourg by having participated today, and I'm very much looking forward to meeting you all again in person very soon. Arigato gozaimasu. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Ambassador Ferring, for those wonderful words to close off our event today. And indeed, thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to His Excellency Pierre Gramegna and all the speakers today for taking their time to talk through this complex topic. And complexity is, I think, something that I want to come back to here in the closing remarks. It's something that's come up in basically every section of the event today, but it's something that has also been shown to be quite navigable. And I think it's quite clear that there are different perspectives between Europe and Japan on a variety of issues, including obviously sustainable finance. But these issues are generally challenges that we need to work on together. So I think this is a good kicking off point for further dialogue on a range of topics, including obviously sustainable finance. With that being said, all that remains for me to do is to thank our sponsors as well for helping organise this event, and I encourage you to check our website for future events coming up, including towards the end of this year a focus on 2022. Thank you very much, and goodbye.